Hello and welcome one more week to You Talking to Me, the Euranet Plus debate. Reforming the European Union has been discussed for a long time. However, the Brexit referendum results have been received in Brussels as an urgent wake-up call. But what are politicians talking about when they say Europe needs to be reshaped? This is one of the questions we are going to try to answer today, together with two members of the European Parliament that I would like to introduce right now. Mr. Helmut Scholz, member of the European Parliament for the United Left. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. And Mr. Georg Schöpflin from the European People's Party, also member of the European Parliament. Thank you for being here. So I would like to go with the first question I was mentioning right now in the introduction. We have heard these days that Europe needs to be rethink, reshaped. What do we mean with that?
First of all, I would say that Brexit was really a wake-up call, but it is only expressing a long dissatisfaction and distrust in European policy made by the European Union institutions as well as by the member states. And I think we have to reshape in the understanding that policy which has to be pick up the interests, the wishes, the requests from people, that European policies is carried out both at the European Union institutional level but also on the member state or even on the regional level. So what the member states are doing in their concrete policies for the daily life for citizens is of course very often interpreted as if it would be a decision by the EU institutions. So we have to make it much more understandable who is deciding at which level which concrete problem. And I think in this understanding we have really to reshape European policies.
What's your view on that, Mr. Schöpflin?
Well, first of all, although I'm Hungarian, I did live for a long time in the United Kingdom, so I have an insider's knowledge. It's a wake-up call. I don't know if I like this metaphor, but everybody's using it. But in a way, that tells you something about the people. Why do they need to be woken up? All you have to do in England, and I do mean England, not the United Kingdom, is leave London, which is a strange, extraordinary, weird place, start going north. And the further north you go, the bigger the poverty, the bigger the exclusion, the bigger the sense of hopelessness. And I think these are the people who say, we'll vote against anything. Because we want to send a message, it's another expression I hate, to the elites, pay attention to us. Where is our human dignity? Now, we've seen this as a British phenomenon, although I think actually it's all to do with an English nationhood, but that's a separate discussion. But it's not unique to the United Kingdom. And if you say, well, but what about Scotland? Well, you know, there the Scottish identity has become tied up with European identity. Look around Europe. Pretty much every country, there is an anti-integrationist force which is capable of mobilizing 15, 20, even 30%, as in France. So we do have to rethink what kind of... Well, do we want a Europe at all? My answer to that is yes. I'm a moderate integrationist. What kind of Europe? Well, there you have three options. Federalism, intergovernmentalism, and no Europe at all. So I'm an intergovernmentalist, but obviously I recognize that the things which have been attained until now are all for the most part worth keeping.
I would like to include in this debate two questions coming from our Euranet radio members. So I would like to listen first the first question coming from Poland, from Polski Radio, from our colleague Joachim Cicierski. We can listen please the question.
Hello from Warsaw. With Britain leaving the EU, pessimists see Poland ending up sidelined in a bloc dominated by the Eurozone countries. Optimists, however, see Poland in the near future as the new leader in the central and eastern part of Europe. How do you see Poland's role in the EU after Brexit?
So as Joachim was saying, many countries are fearing now, but they say that they are already like a two-speed Europe between the Eurozone countries and the non-Eurozone countries. And now they fear that if the UK leaves the European Union, Eurozone countries will manage to go faster in the integration. What do you think about that?
I think that some Eurozone countries might very well try. I can't see Greece, which is a Eurozone country, or Portugal, or even Spain, going very far in this integration. So we have to rethink this. My fear as a Central European is a core Europe. Central Europe will once again be on the periphery of Europe. if we're talking in all EU terms, then obviously some of the safeguards which were built into the British deal back in February, in other words, no movement by Eurozone without some consultation with the so-called pre-ins, the not yet members. We all have an obligation to join, except for Denmark. But how that will work out now is too early to say. But the anxiety that Central Europe will now be left behind, I think that's real. And I think it's something which the West Europeans should be fully aware of.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about this?
Maybe before we're going into the concrete questions of the financial aspects or the economic effects of that, I think that for Poland and for the Polish citizens, I would say they also have to start to rediscuss what is the value of being in the European Union. So what is the European Union membership meaning for the Polish citizens? So how they have a chance to participate in a democratic way in the decision-making process. So how they are obliging their own government to fulfill a certain task which is carried out by the European Union. So let us take in the social Europe, in the social dimension of Europe, or in the further economic integration. So, do we really working on a economic policy which is in the interest of all members of the European Union, for the citizens as well as for the member states? We have national sovereign member states, but of course, if they are joining the European Union, they have committed themselves to contribute to the further integration, to further development of this European Union. And as Mr. Schöpflin just said, in the treaties there is included the obligation or the request to become Eurozone members. That is of course depending on the ability of each country to fulfill the tasks which are linked to this membership of the Eurozone. So and of course if you look into the austerity policies carried out in the name of the European Union, but by the more stronger economic member states, vice versa the weaker economies in the European Union, it has led also to a certain distrust in the decision-making process. So, I mean, we have here to share much more the concrete terms and conditions in the national development as well as in the common aim of the further integration process. And therefore, I'm calling, for example, I'm a little bit more federalistic maybe than Mr. Schöpflin, because I think if we are integrating ourselves, then it is not possible with the conditions of the Eurozone, of the Euro, who is predicting the conditions which under the economies are developing themselves, to react on a changing framework for this economic performance of the member states. So we have to take into consideration that these members have also the obligation to fulfill the whole common task, and that means for those countries being in and being out.
But it seems very difficult to move together 28, 27 now maybe countries all together. So wouldn't it be more realistic to think that two-speed Europe is like the most possible future for the European Union?
In a certain way we have already the two-speed Europe. If we are frank to ourselves and honest. So we have to tell the people that in certain fields some countries are going ahead, or they have the chance to impose with their power they have inside the European Union on the development of others. And here I would say we have to come away from this intergovernmental method, because the intergovernmental method means that the member state that all member states have to agree on a common consensus, and then the more strong are deciding what is going on. And I think we have to understand that we should much more put forward the community method. So the European Parliament, the parliaments in the interest of the whole European Union. As a German, I will work out a legislation, then of course this legislation must take into account the concrete concerns and problems it will create for other member states. So if we are striving for a better social Europe, it means a social Europe on the concrete economic terms in Estonia, in Poland, in Greece, in Portugal and in Germany. We have to think what does a decision mean for the decision in the other area.
And even if it's not an easy idea to defend the two-speed Europe, do you think that it might be the most realistic scenario?
I think at the moment it is probably the least unrealistic scenario. That's to say, if you look around Europe, the popular support for more integration is weak. Most people, I think, in Europe are ready to accept certain areas which should be governed at the supranational level. The example I always give my constituents in Hungary is that we are downriver of all our neighbours except for Serbia, so if there's pollution upstream, it's best to handle that at the supranational or the Brussels level. So for us, environmental legislation becomes very important. Organised crime, food safety, all this kind of stuff. But then there are lots of areas which I think actually are best handled subsidiarity at the local level or the regional level and should not be over-regulated by Brussels. And I think this is what people do object to. Some of it is sheer ignorance. People have no idea because the bureaucrats at home say, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. It's Brussels telling us to do this. It's complete nonsense. But it's a very widespread piece of nonsense. I don't think it's different in France or any other country. And in a way, it's the accountability. Huge quantities of material, less now actually than in the previous two cycles, parliamentary cycles, regulations coming out of the Commission, and there's no way of stopping it. Now, what I'd quite like to see, if we are going to go in this intergovernmental direction, is for the governments which go to council, the ministers who take decisions, then go home and are made accountable by their own domestic parliaments for the decisions that they've taken. The only country where this happens seriously is Denmark, where the ministers do have to say, well, actually, the decision that we took was such and such. Well, why do you take that decision? And so on. But until that happens, the great majority of citizens will have no idea what we're doing. And the ignorance is part of the reason why there's such a strong disintegrationist trend.
I would like to welcome another question, this one coming from Germany, from our colleague Monika Olszewski from Radio AMS. If we can listen it, please.
It seems Angela Merkel wants to reduce the power of the Commission and give it back to the member states. Do you think member states should be given more freedom of choice again?
The question is clear. Some member states see in Brexit an opportunity to reduce the influence of the Commission and giving it back to the member states. What do you think on that?
If I would take the migration policy, for example, as an example, then I would say the member states have the say. And even if the Commission is proposing certain keys, certain proportional methods to solve in a solidarity way redistribution of the migrants coming or the refugees coming to the European Union, then the member states had rejected to participate in a European solution, if we are honest and frank. So I mean, the member states have, in a lot of fields of the daily political development of the European Union, already the say. And I'm much more in favor of saying, no, we should really take into account what we have to decide at the municipal, at the regional or at the national level, according to the subsidiarity problem, and where we need really common European solutions. And then the Commission should have the say in this way. So I don't agree with Mrs. Merkel that when she is telling us that she wants to have more power for the member states. The member states have the power in the Council. The question is how this power in the Council is explained to the citizens. What the Council is deciding in which interest. Is it in the interest of all 500 million people living in the European Union or not? I think that is on the stake, and here I would not agree with Mrs. Merkel.
And do you agree with Ms. Merkel?
Well, I've already said something which indicates that I do agree, but I don't completely disagree with Helmut Scholz. I think that it's again a question of power. And suppose that the Commission does launch some kind of an initiative and the member states don't like it, then the member states, I think, should be able to find mechanisms for saying, we will pick and choose, we will take this much of it, we'll leave the rest, or we will consult a national parliament. And ideally, but that's much more difficult, how do you consult the citizens? The various mechanisms that have been tried, like referenda, don't necessarily produce the result that anybody wants. I'm thinking of the 2005 referendum in France, for example, and others that one could always mention. In Hungary, we had a national consultation. We've got a referendum coming up on migration. So there is a considerable commitment on the part of the government to talk to the citizens. Doesn't always work, but we can reasonably say that the government tries to do its best. The Commission, I think, has made next to no effort to explain its case to the citizens. It doesn't go to the country, or very little, and say, look, I'm going on national television, this is what the Commission would like to do. And it is these gaps, which are partly about communication, but partly also the Commission has accumulated a lot of power, and it's not really responsible to anybody for that power. That drives the irritation.
We're running out of time, but very quickly, you're both members of another institution, the European Parliament. What should be the role of the European Parliament in this context? You said Commission has so much power. What is the role the Parliament should play?
Don't forget, the European Parliament is a very large institution and does different things in different committees. I can only speak for my own committees, basically Constitution and Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs talks about foreign affairs and maybe has some influence. We send messages to countries which may or may not pay attention. The Constitution Committee, Europe doesn't of course have a constitution, is to discuss the future of Europe. And that's what we do.
But should the Parliament have more power? And we are here talking about the question of democracy, legitimacy.
Yes, if you're really regarding the European Parliament as an institution which is mirroring the will or the interests of the citizens, then the Parliament should have the power of initiative. We have not really an initiative power in all the fields where we are covering daily political developments. So I mean, here to give the European Parliament a certain role, like a normal parliament at the national level, would lead to much more linkages between the interests of the citizens and the role of the Parliament. And then the Parliament has, or could have also the chance to control the Commission in a certain way.
Yes.
Because just now the Commission is the only organ which has a chance to initiate legislation. And that I think we have to change as one of the first steps. But that means all the member states have to agree on the reforms, because we are going into the primary and the secondary law of the constitutionalization of the European Union. I mean, huge task, but we should not think that it is not possible, and we should be brave. And I guess we together in the Constitutional Affairs Committee could even cooperate in doing it, so, and then we communicate it back to our citizens.
Well, in fact, there are many reports going on in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, so we will continue for sure talking about this topic. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for watching.